Hey everybody, so I'm painting Coxcomb Mountain out at the Diamond Gulch off of Dry Creek Road in Sedona. And this is my palette. I've just squeezed out some alizarin crimson. You can see the ultramarine blue there, cadmium yellow medium, and titanium white. Just setting up my easel here. This is my odorless mineral spirits, so I actually don't use any medium, just this thinner. And mixing my palette, again, figuring out these different tiers of greens. And I thought I'd demonstrate 3 different types of greens because they're all appearing in the landscape. So starting with the base of ultramarine and cad yellow medium. And so this first pile here has got a little bit more alizarin crimson within the mixture. And this will be really nice for some of those more distant greens. And then I've got this middle mixture. This is going to be more of the foreground, so more yellow mixed in there. Still a little bit of, the red to desaturate a little. There's some really warm orangey greens in the foreground. This last one here has a lot more blue in it, and that's going to be those receding hills all the way in the background. And then between those mixtures, I can create different greens. Now this is going to be the Coxcomb red rock color. It's got alizarin with cadmium yellow medium and a little bit of white for, you've got the shade, the highlight, the mid-tone I've mixed in between there. A little bit of ultramarine blue went into that red rock color as well. And starting with a 9 by 12 inch horizontally formatted panel, you can see the view of Coxcomb there. So I've also got these foreground greens that I haven't really used yet in the palette setup. And then some of that foreground red rock, which is very orange in contrast to the Coxcomb Mountain that's more in the distance. And I've decided to use an alizarin crimson wash today because of more of the gray notes in the scene. It's a much kind of cooler palette in a lot of ways. And the sketch is going to be more land than sky because I've got all these really interesting pieces in the landscape. I've got these bigger trees in the foreground and then this opening between the grass and the brush. There's foothills, and then there's the Coxcomb feature with mountains behind that. And so there's a lot of visual interest, and there's a lot of just like dynamic shapes and variety within this scene. Like I don't feel like I have to do a lot of inventing. It is all kind of just right there. One of the major things I've done is I haven't included that big tree off to the right. That's casting a big shadow on my foreground plane. And all I have to do is just not include that shadow because I'm not including that tree. And I really like how open and light the foreground feels. So I'll just continue the light on those grasses right up into that spot. So now I'm just pulling from that middle mixture I created on my palette with more of those orangey greens. And I'm really pushing the yellows and the reds, the feeling of the warmth in this foreground vegetation, because I've got so many greens that recede in the distance, and I really want those tiers to be seen as separate. So I've got to kind of push the temperature warmer here in the foreground because of all those cool mixtures of green as they recede. You know, and those take up about 1/3 of the composition, so I really want to get that as close as I can. It's really progressed quite quickly just with my shadow and my middle value greens on that upright vegetation. Those are definitely some of my darkest areas of the painting. The grasses are kind of a middle value to light, very warm green. There's still a little bit of blue mixed in there too because it's reflecting the light from the sky. And then popping in just some different colors into those grasses, and then, you know, adding some darker notes where the ground plane meets the grass. Tucked that under some of the trees as well. Some of that brush that comes up a little bit further, that's casting more of a shadow underneath it. So also wanting to model this foreground plane a bit more. The red earth kind of gets a little darker at the edges of these trees here and in various spots. So keeping those reds warmer. And then creating a nice highlight for the center of the ground plane there that's receiving some direct light from the sun. So it's pretty overcast, but I am still getting light and shadow. So it's maybe a bit more tonal, less high contrast here. Shifts are a little bit more subtle. And I can always add in darker accents and highlights later on once I've kind of mapped everything out here. And this is my first go at my more distant green, which is that first pile that I mixed on my palette. So it gets bluer as you go back, which can seem like it's darker, but it's not always. As things recede, they actually get lighter, but blue is inherently a darker value anyways, so, you know, adding in some white to those mixtures, making sure I've got, you know, a fair amount of red in this first tier as it goes back, because I still have to have some blues up against it. And then in the distance, there are definitely some highlights where there's no vegetation on those background hills. So you've got, you know, some grassland and some red rock in the distance there. as it recedes, there's less of that saturation. So all that means is that, you're mixing a bit of the complement into your colors. So that red has a little bit of green, and that, more greens have a little bit more red. And coxcomb really has like a very light gray. And I have to make sure that the shadows there don't compete with the greens below it. So there's a little more, blue mixed in to some of those darker parts of the hill. And now that I have these 3 different planes blocked in, I can really gauge, what needs to be shifted in temperature and value. And the values are definitely closer together as you recede as well. So, this is a pretty atmospheric painting, I would say. Another rule of thumb with atmosphere is that there's higher contrast in the foreground, and then there's less of that as the planes recede. So you're both losing contrast, which is, value relationships. You're losing that and saturation as you go back. But you still want to maintain value groups and occasional highlights. So, what I'll do, like I put that highlight of the vegetation down and it just wasn't really reading. So I did have to lighten that up a little. And then I've got a bit more of a highlight in that coxcomb vegetation. And you can see like how light and how almost gray blue these distant cliffs are. And this is another reason I started from the foreground and went upwards. Because if I had just started with those background cliffs, they may have been too dark and maybe too colorful. So basically, all of my mixtures are stepping down, meaning, they're gradually having less color and more white mixed into them so that I can get a really accurate read on all of these receding planes. And so because those mountain colors are so light, my sky has to be even lighter. Like this almost feels like just like a white gray sky. And once all of this is blocked in, I can fine tune and come back in and adjust some of the colors and values based on the information that I have here now. And so from this reading that I have now, I can a bit more confidently add in some more colorful blues. So I'm just kind of mixing my ultramarine into that mountain color that I've made and creating actually where those shadows are on the cliff. And so this is bringing a little bit more of that lovely color back into this part of the scene. And what's nice about alla prima is, you know, I can mix on top of what I've already put down. And essentially I've just mixed a little bit of ultramarine blue into that mountain mixture that I made. So it's got still a fair amount of gray in it. And you'll notice how I've saved the coxcomb for last. It's kind of cool how the only thing that's left there is the alizarin underpainting. And I've mixed some alizarin crimson into the ultramarine blue, just a dash of the cadmium yellow medium, and working on where those shadows are on the rock, and refining some of the shapes of the feature here as well. I didn't mention it, but when I did the sky, I was able to kind of carve that feature out a little bit too, and now I'm going back and refining even more with these shadows and the contour lines of the coxcomb feature. And now I've mixed a little bit more alizarin and cad yellow medium and titanium white to get more of that like middle value red rock color. And so I'm just filling in now around those shadows. So at this point, it's kind of going to be a back and forth between my shadow color and the more of the middle value red rock color. And it's still feeling kind of flat, so I definitely have to refine those pieces more. But it's definitely coming together. There's this tier where it kind of breaks off into the vegetation. So integrating that, and that's also helping me to realize where those planes meet. I have to kind of deepen the color of the vegetation a little. And I can, you know, kind of mix my red rock mixture into that like gray blue color and get a really nice, you know, transition. And then there is a little bit of darker vegetation further up the rock that helps to, you know, break it up a little. And I've started to add some highlights on a couple of these pieces of rock to really give it that three-dimensional shape. And now adding a little bit, you know, of shrubs to this plane here where I have some of that highlighted slope. And then adding some of those greens back into the side of the cliff where there is vegetation on the side of the rock as well. And now that I'm feeling like everything is pretty much painted, I can go back throughout the scene and make those refining touches that will really pull it all together, You know, like I've got these branches and some of the foreground trees. And yeah, these final details really, you know, help to communicate the scene. And I'm noticing that these trees will eventually want a little bit more of a highlight on the very edges. And then I can kind of poke some of these grasses in to the foliage as well, and then work on those darker accents at the base of the trees too. And this isn't something that necessarily needs to be done right on location, because I've really got all of my information here. But it is nice because, you know, you can see everything that's going on in the landscape. The longer you stand in front of a scene like this, the more kind of appears to you, like, you know, maybe a piece of reflected light that I wouldn't have seen like an hour ago. And, you know, there is quite a bit of information here that might be hard to just, you know, gather from looking at the photo or the video of it. And it's just so alive. So I love being a part of, you know, nature in real time and communicating that experience through, you know, through paint. I've added some highlights in the grasses too, and, you know, kind of opened up a little bit of that landscape. I feel like right in the middle off to the left a little is where you kind of can enter the scene, and coxcomb is the focus. So I really got all of the shapes around this feature kind of supporting the eye to land up there. And I'm adding some more greens back into this tree. So a little bit more, you know, less of that like orangey color, just in certain areas. So kind of going back and forth between dark accents, highlights, halftones. These are all, you know, important pieces to refine and yeah, so gonna just add a touch of cloud to the sky. Just give it a little more texture and interest. It's already so white up there. I'm just dipping my brush into my titanium white and kind of feathering it in. Just super soft. And those were my final marks for the scene out here. I'm going to call it a day, and thank you so much for being here with me. See you next time.